a horizon line a third of the way down from the top. And this is a good guide to help you paint most of the heads of the people so they look like they're in perspective. So I'm mixing up a puddle of ultramarine and burnt sienna mixed. I'm using a flat 1-inch brush and I'm just spattering around that sort of horizon area, but also sort of below it. This is going to make up some of the sort of shapes of the bodies, but it's a great way of starting off, especially if you're using a blank sheet of paper. So I'm using my size 8 brush now, and I'm just using the paint on the paper to paint sort of arched windows, long arched windows, or soft rectangles that don't have sharp pointy corners. And I'm varying the sizes as well, making some smaller, some really small, and some larger. So it looks like people way off in the distance and people coming towards us. So it can be the front of people and also the back of people. And I'll show you how I'm going to do that. But this is a really nice abstracty way of starting off. Really, really super loose, super fun. And you can just do this on the back of an old painting or even in your sketchbooks. So I'm mixing up here some Payne's grey, taking off the excess there, and I'm going to paint the heads. And I'm going to let a little bit of that paint sort of touch the wet paint beneath so you get a nice soft edge. So they don't look like they're balancing on top. And make the shape more like a rugby ball than a football. So soft edges again, no pointy corners, but no round circles either. So the heads will all still be on the horizon, and this is 1 point perspective, so it really does create depth in your painting. And I'm mixing up some burnt sienna here, touch of yellow, pinch of red, and this is just going to be for the faces, and I'm going to paint them damp into damp there with my size 8 brush. Don't worry if it runs, because I'm going to be painting clothing on top. This is extremely loose, so the faces nearer to us will be slightly bigger and those ones further away smaller. I'm just using a flat 1-inch brush here, just with some water, just to smooth away all of those other little dots that I created. And I'm going to use a touch of that burnt sienna and ultramarine again. I'm painting damp into damp, and I'm just painting imaginary buildings. So just using sort of vertical lines coming down. So the ones sort of to the right and left of the people will be the nearest ones, and the ones in the middle will be sort of further off into the distance. And I'm just using a little bit of that colour to paint more vertical lines, sort of wet on dry actually in the foreground, but you could wet that if you wanted to, if it's easier. And again, just painting all these vertical lines, varying the colours. Mixing up a creamier and taking off the excess here, burnt sienna and ultramarine. I'm just painting damp into damp around the people's heads. I want to leave a little white sort of halo effect, so it looks like the light is hitting the top of their heads. I've seen other artists do this and I think it looks really cool. So I'm just painting, and again varying the colour, so you could add a pinch more ultramarine, a touch more burnt sienna, and just blend along there. Don't worry about it even drying. This is a quick, loose sort of semi-abstract sketch, so I want you to kind of feel free and loose, like you're practicing this, and take the pressure off it having to be a perfectly finished piece. So I'm just using this lovely grey colour, working my way along, using the tip of my brush to carefully. So once the painting is dry, I'm going to paint some clothing. Now you can choose any colours you like, your favourite colours. So I'm going to use some bright colours for the people in the foreground, and for the people off in the distance, I'm going to cool those colours down, maybe stick to that ultramarine and burnt sienna mix. So here I've got some red, painting wet on dry, and I'm using some ultramarine burnt sienna for the trousers. Again, you can vary the sort of trousers or jeans, or obviously paint skirts and dresses, whatever you fancy really. It's your street scene. But I like to vary the colours of the trousers, maybe some Prussian blue with some Payne's grey, some even black on its own, so you can really sort of build it up. For the people in the foreground though, you want to keep that sort of quite dark. For this simpler version, I am actually painting a reflection underneath the legs with a paler version of the leg colour. In this instance, it's the ultramarine and burnt sienna watered down, and just paling it beneath them about the same length. Later in this tutorial, where I show you a little bit more of a challenging scene, you may not want to paint this reflection because I actually lift it out later. So you may want to check that out and decide which one you want to paint. Now the legs are literally two sort of straight lines down, coming from the sort of waist or from the bottom of the jacket or coat. I usually make one line slightly thicker than the other and one leg shorter than the other, so they look like they're walking and one leg's a little bit behind. So the leg coming forward is slightly thicker. Hope that makes sense. But don't worry if you don't get that quite right. It is sort of an impression and a sort of semi-abstract painting. So as you can see here, I'm just mixing up some burnt sienna with a touch of ultramarine, painting a sort of dark sort of brown coat, wet on dry, and then mixing up a little bit of violet and Prussian blue here for the trousers. And again, one leg longer than the other, so they look like they're walking off into the distance there. So I'm going to focus on painting a person here just in the sort of middle distance. So again, painting the little arch window with the dark sort of Payne's grey colour, rinsing my brush. I've decided to give her a red skirt, so I'm painting that wet on dry, and I'm using a little bit of dark just to paint the legs in, again one shorter than the other. And as you can see, these legs are higher up than the legs of the people in the foreground, so the legs go higher but the heads remain around that horizon line, remember, to create depth in your painting and to follow the rules of 1 point perspective. And as things go further away, they get smaller and paler. So details like I'm painting here, buttons on a coat, etc., darker, stronger tonal colours will come forward. So you can really dress up your people. You can give them hats and scarves, bags, etc. You can even put a couple together or a little group together. I've actually got them all by themselves here. Didn't really think too far ahead here. I have to say, just spattering at the beginning is such a loose, lovely way of starting a painting like this, because you kind of just go for it. So I really recommend it. So I'm actually using green here, green coat, quite nice. And again, with the legs, nice sort of dark grey colour there. And with the arms, etc., I wouldn't worry too much about the arms at this stage. I will be putting them in later. I find sometimes when you've got all of this to worry about, it can really tighten you up. So you can just paint these arch windows in, a little bit of detail and colour, and two sort of vertical lines, one thicker than the other for the legs. You can kind of get started, get those shapes started. The other thing you want to do is try and have the sort of the bodies, the arch windows, about the same length as the legs. It kind of keeps that person in proportion as well. And then a very, very small head. You can always make the heads bigger, but it is trickier to make them smaller. So as you can see here, I'm just painting my people now in the distance as well. It's sometimes a big challenge trying to think of the different coloured clothing and things like that. So you can always come back to it later. You don't have to paint this all in one session. And you can leave this as simple as you like. So you could actually paint these reflections, keep the distance like this, really sort of fuzzy, just paint your people in and leave it. But I'll give you a little bit more detail towards the end of it if you want to add some more as well. And what I would recommend is practice doing this first of all. And the other thing is, when you're painting the legs, try to do it with one stroke almost, rather than sort of painting in a kind of an outline. It looks a lot more freer and looser. And sometimes that can be tricky straight off to do, and again you might want to practice that. So I haven't painted too many arms at this stage. I've kept it really simple, especially if you're a beginner. You can sort of almost paint a vertical line down one side of their coat or jacket with a bag at the end of it to give the illusion that they're carrying it, but you don't have to paint a hand or anything. And so the person who's got the green coat and the pink coat, I've given them a bag at the end of their arm. It's a really good exercise as well with painting brush marks, expressive brush marks, so you can really practice that. So you could use that just as an exercise as well and see what you come up with. You may surprise yourselves. So just working with the smaller people in the distance, again you can just use sort of blue greys for this, ultramarine with a touch of burnt sienna, painting them small, but again sort of the heads on around that horizon area. They don't have to be exactly on it because people vary in height. So you could have someone who's 5 foot tall to someone who was 6'7" or 7 foot tall. So it's all going to vary, and children obviously will be sort of below the horizon as well. So what I'm doing here is I'm just lifting off some of the paint on the faces there, just to reapply some of the paint because it looked a little bit muddy. So watercolor isn't permanent, so it does lift off. And what I'm doing now is just applying a little bit more of an orangey paint back, so the faces look like they're glowing almost, and they really come forward. And what I'm doing now is mixing up some Payne's grey with burnt sienna, and I'm just adding some hair on top of those people, varying the length. You can vary the colour as well, just to kind of bring them to life a little bit more. So it just shows from that very initial spatter and that really basic arch window to sort of sticks coming from their waist, you can start to add and embellish your people, bringing them to life, adding lots of details here and there, especially to the people in the foreground. Here is the first stage of my finished painting, so you could leave it here if you wanted to, or you may want to go on and develop your painting. So the next thing I want to do is I want to paint some shadows on the people. So I've decided the light's coming from the left, so the shadows is going to be on the right hand side. So I've mixed up some ultramarine with a touch of the Windsor red, and I'm just painting some shadows wet on dry on the right hand side of the people with a very sort of thin dilute wash. And I'm going to use that same wash to paint some cast shadows on the pavement wet on dry, bigger in the foreground as they get smaller and paler as they go off into the distance there. So this is a fun bit. I'm using that same shadow colour, the ultramarine with the red. You could use ultramarine and burnt sienna, and I'm just painting the buildings. So bigger marks on the right and left hand side because they're closer to us, and I'm just sort of painting vertical lines and small dabs for windows. So it's very impressionistic, and really smaller, paler sort of windows and marks in the distance there. So it's super loose, super fun actually. Just paint a little bit more dark just directly underneath the feet of the people, especially those in the foreground, because they would be especially darker there. Remember, in little people painting, no hands, no feet, and no sort of facial features as well. You just want minimal details. So I'm just painting a few more windows here, just printing with my brush, and paler windows, smaller windows in the distance there. And it's a lot of fun to do, and it just creates the illusion of distant buildings and windows. As you can see, the ones furthest back, there's just little dots there. So I'm using a magic watercolor sponge eraser. You can actually buy these from a DIY store as well. They remove paint marks on walls. So I'm cutting it in half, and I'm going to dip it into some clean water, wring all the water out, and then just remove that dried paint there where the reflection is. You can see there's some paint on the sponge. I'm going to repeat that, sort of rubbing off gently. I don't want to tear the paper either, so just do this gently to remove the paint. And most of it's come off quite nicely. There's just this little stubborn bit there below the lady with the pink coat. So I'm just working that a little bit more. Make sure you use a clean bit of the sponge or rinse your sponge out. So here goes. I'm just working a little bit harder. So it does sort of make the paper scuff a little bit. But I just thought it was worth it just to remove that reflection. I'm going to do the same with the person with the green coat as well, and also dab with your paper towel to remove any excess moisture afterwards. And I'm going to allow the paint. When you remove paint, you have to add some more. So I'm just painting a little bit more sort of shadows on the road here using the ultramarine with a touch of the Windsor red. What I'm doing now is I'm just mixing up a little bit more of that ultramarine and burnt sienna, and I'm just painting a touch more detail to the buildings there, to the left especially. Try to make your doorways big enough for the people to get inside. You don't want them too big or too small. I think this one might be a little bit on the small side, so I think it'll be a window instead. So I'm just adding a touch more detail to this person on the right here. Again, using the ultramarine and burnt sienna. You could use black or Payne's grey as well. And I'm just embellishing, sharpening up edges, painting shadows undercoat. So adding more details wet on dry. You can just stick to that dark colour, painting bags, sharpening up the heads, and just these little darks and details, painting sort of the shadows between the arm and the back. just here and there really does bring the painting to life, make it look a little bit more impressionistic, less abstract almost. So it's up to you how far you want to go, but just by adding these darks really is helpful. And you can just paint once as well when you paint these marks. And always keep loading your brush as well. So I'm just adding a few more marks, and windows here, wet on dry on the buildings, a little bit paler. And I thought I would just give a final spatter here. I started with a spatter, I'm going to finish with a spatter of a very dilute ultramarine and burnt sienna just around the horizon lines. They look like lots of people in the distance, lots of tiny small heads to finish off. So here is a close-up. I'm really pleased with it, and I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial.